You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic.
I'm Menachem Smovic, PhD candidate at Northwestern University, studying Russian literature and film.
And I'm Cameron Lulana, a literature enthusiast and guy working in media. We're two friends who met studying in Russia. We like talking about books so much that we made it into a podcast.
And this podcast is the podcast for people who want to learn more about Slavic literature, art, and culture. Every episode, we're going to be bringing you the background and analysis you'll need to know to understand these works.
If you're interested in supporting us, you can head on over to our website, slaviclitpod.com. Oh, Matt, what, after 7 months and 17 days, are we finally getting into this week?
This week, we are finishing Life and Fate. This episode is going to be covering Book 3, chapters 49 through 61. And, long time coming.
Real long time coming. Every year we say we're going to make the next long series less difficult, and then the next long series is always longer and tougher on us.
Yeah.
Entirely of our own volition. We make it worse,
right,
just to be clear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nothing to do necessarily with the book itself, but more so with the things that we choose to make ourselves do with that book.
That's the beautiful thing about this podcast. It's half education, half, hey, watch these two guys step on rakes over and over again for years at a time.
Yep.
Well, It is very exciting to be getting here. We have the last few chapters, final thoughts. We'll also be getting into an audience question about the book. Of course, you are always free. If you have more, you felt anything was unanswered, you got any more thoughts that are not addressed in this question, please jump to our Discord, send us a note on social media. As usual, lots of avenues. Discord's probably the best one. That's where we're most available. But even if you're far in the future, there is still ways to answer your question about this book.
Or maybe not. Maybe I'm out of answers by the time you ask.
Yeah, maybe by the time you found this episode, we've disappeared into the ether. But barring that,
ask away.
All right. Well, as per usual, the same disclaimer we've given every time. We're not going chapter by chapter, just going to give the brief arcs before we get into talking about it. If you want to hear more about every day, you can go to our dailies for that. That will be found at this point, by the time you will be listening to this, if you are listening when it comes out, mostly in our main feed. If you're listening in the future, there is a secondary feed which we put those into, so we're not crowding our main one. You can find a link to that in the description. The first couple of episodes still on our main feed. A link to the secondary feed will also be in there. Or just look up...
Although I did like having the 200 episodes on our main feed.
It did feel very accomplished to have that many, you know?
Yeah.
It used to be when we were getting started, we saw other equivalent podcasts and we're like, are we keeping up with the rate that everyone else is? And it turns out 7 months of doing daily podcasting can really blow you right past that point.
Yeah, really pump your numbers up.
Okay. You want to start talking about the arcs in this book?
Yeah, let's end some arcs.
All right, let's move from everyone's life to their fates, so to speak. We are wrapping up with Novikov's tank corps, which is heading for Ukraine. Him and his good buddies, Yetmanov and Udubnov, are arguing over how fast these troops should be going. Novikov, ever the military mind, says, hey, I want to make sure we're not going faster than our air cover. And also, they are exhausted. They're human beings. And Udubnov, boo, yeah, big boo, because Udubnov and Yetmanov both say, hey, counterpoint, if we're the first into the Ukrainian Republic, we're going to get awards for that, and that's going to be super cool. And Novikov
counterpoint, big shiny badge.
and Novikov is tempted by that. He's not immune to that, the big shiny badge.
Yeah, I mean, collect them all.
You gotta collect them all. Yeah. He also during this period receives his letter from Zhenya, informing him that she is leaving him for Krymov, and he takes that news very well. Before he is removed from command and summoned away to the general staff at the back lines. I don't think it's clear if he's being summoned for an interrogation or an arrest. But even many of the other apparatchiks, many of the other officers at his level are also unclear on what exactly is going on or even why he's been summoned. It's unclear if he'll ever be back in command. And that's basically where we leave his story, like many of them, without a conclusion. And speaking of leaving stories without conclusions, we also have Victor's life, which is going great since Stalin's call. He is getting all the support he needs. He's got all the staff members he needs. He's really hyping himself up to leave his wife, although that's a pretty humiliating chapter for him, as he kind of acknowledges he's really being very unfair to her, before he's finally forced by his new friends into signing a letter condemning two likely innocent men who are accused of killing another writer, which is his final trial and tribulation of this novel. We go to Krimov, 2 last chapters. He has got one last fantastic conversation with Katsanel and Bogan, with the old Chekist opining to him that the communist revolution will truly be achieved when the difference between the gulag and the outside world ceases to be, and there no longer needs to be any wire. Great, very funny chapter. Krimov is like, hey, what if we just went wrong? That's also another option. And Katsanel and Bogan said, nope, we're doing right, just imperfectly. God bless. Krimov also finally gets his package from Yevgenia, sort of justifying the faith he has put in her that she was not the one who got him arrested. Before we more or less end the book on the most popular cast, of course, Spiridonov, Vera, his mother-in-law, Alexandra Vladimirovna, Pavel Andreev, a friend of Alexandra's, and Pavel's daughter-in-law, Natalia, who has come to stay with them. And they are trying to rebuild their lives in Stalingrad. Spiridonov, having left 24 hours before the return attack of the Red Army, of course, a great act of cowardice, has been rewarded for that by being reassigned to a peat-burning power plant in the Ural Mountains. And we end his story with him proposing to everyone that they follow him there and try to build a new life. Before one last vague chapter where a sort of unnamed couple welcome spring in the midst of a late winter, let's say. We'll talk more about that when we get there.
Exactly where I thought he was going. Pretty much, kind of like stereotypical even.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
We all saw that one coming.
Just like Stalingrad, where we all knew it was going to end on Krimov finally getting to Stalingrad. That's what you assume when you read the title of the book, that you won't really be there until the last 20 pages.
Right. And then to spend the chapters before on Spiridonov was pretty good, too.
Yeah. All our main characters. But a fascinating decision, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Is there anywhere that you want to start here? Any big themes?
Yeah, I think that we can kind of go in order. There's just a few characters that are wrapped up in these last few chapters, and then we have one good audience question that I had kind of pulled that was a thematic, wrap up, I suppose, which I think is a good question for discussion. But the Novikov part here was a really fascinating one, because he's kind of showed to be like, a little more level-headed, a little, I don't know. He's a pretty good guy for a good portion of the novel. And then you get this insight into him, which is really not particularly nice. He's kind of, as you mentioned, he's really starting to think in terms of not just the people around him, but the awards that he might be eligible to receive and the recognition that he would receive from people around him. And this is very much unlike him. I think he's probably sleep deprived at this point, and so a little bit of a pass for that. But then this is just like a classic Grossman technique here, where this whole chapter following that, where he gets the letter from Genya and she's breaking it off saying, I'm going to go follow Krimov into the labor camps, and it was just a really interesting look inside his head and how he processed that, going through every stage of grief pretty much. And I like how just kind of like nestled in the end of the chapter where he's talking about how faithful he has been to Genya, where he then thinks to himself, well, there was that one time last week, but other than that, I don't know. I thought that was a particularly telling moment of his character.
Right, exactly. Or, although it's one that is shared by a lot of the men in Grossman's book, I will say so.
A lot of the Grossmen, yeah.
A lot of the Grossmen, indeed, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the fact that Getmanov doesn't actually turn Novikov in, that's a bit of a surprise. There's that sort of sinister subplot of, we went over this at one point, but where Getmanov is kind of reporting on Novikov to, I don't know, Central Committee or to whoever his supervisors are, but Novikov's in charge of a really important tank corps, so presumably somebody on the Central Committee is overseeing this as well. And he has any number of chances where he could totally have stuck a knife in Novikov's back, and we find out at the end of the book that he didn't. In fact, he was really advocating for Novikov to not be removed from his command post and talking about how he's just, above reproach. And of course we know that he's not, and Getmanov knows that he's not, but this sort of system, I think, in a way, really forces that hyperbole out of people. If it was just to write, Novikov is a good commander, always follows orders, what is that? That's not getting anyone promoted. That's not doing anything for anyone. In order to really save someone from maybe being interrogated or maybe something bad happening to them, it's really important that Getmanov actually does write this letter that, he's morally, politically above reproach. I mean, outstanding abilities, all of these things. It's actually a rare Getmanov W.
Yeah, and one that, as if we understand the logic of the novel, could later become a problem for Getmanov. So you understand that this incredibly calculated man has stuck his neck out, potentially to a bad end, to his own his perhaps a fatal misstep. And I think that's one of the a counter theme to, no, maybe not a counter theme, it's a corollary theme where we have I think we learned this pretty well when Krimov is in interrogation, and we especially through Katzenellenbogen, where it might be tempting to look at this system of arrests at the pre-Gulag stage, let's call it, and say this is a completely illogical system. But as it's shown throughout the book, it's not an illogical system. It possesses its own very strange logics, logics of guilt, logics of trying to find these enemies of the state. Katzenellenbogen understands and explains to Krimov the logic of the system. So we understand that this is not something we generally recognize, but it's not something that you can't understand either. At the same time, we also understand these logics are not entirely within the hands of the people who control them. Novikov is above, up to this point, any arrests, although he's certainly been suspected of things. He countermanded an order by Stalin. Of course, he was going to be investigated. But that's one that apparently has gotten past. Getmanov seems to have ordered him to, like you said, Getmanov put out his neck for Novikov. And so when he's recalled, everyone's confused about it because no one involved in this process, who would normally be the people who would be making that happen, are making it happen. But as the rumor goes, if the rumor is to be believed, it's because of his connection to Krimov, which the irony there is that he's the one who turns Krimov in, although unintentionally, and he's not even connected to Krimov. His sort of girlfriend's ex-husband is arrested. That's his crime. At the same time that this system has a logic, it also easily supersedes the people running it and can so easily get out of hand. So we understand both that the system does work on a certain logic, and yet also that it can totally, it doesn't need them to exist. That is one of the difficult things about the Soviet state.
Yeah, and that's a good point, that for someone who has been so calculating the entire book, for him to sort of, hitch himself to Novikov is actually a, within the system that we've been looking at, that's a pretty solid thing to do for someone. I think there are, any number of other things that, any number of other characters that in this sort of situation, they probably wouldn't do it. Clearly a lot of other people, just generally speaking, would not do that in the situation. So I don't know. I know this is, all the plots are basically left a little bit open-ended, and I think that's, it's for the best, right? You get to kind of infer how you think how it would play out based on everything that we've seen so far. And I think it's almost like, I don't know, it has a similar ending to, I don't know, in my head it's almost like, this one's almost like Sopranos, right? Where it doesn't really matter. Oh wait, did you finish Sopranos?
No, but I know how it ends.
Never mind. Okay. So it's, like the time that the book depicts is over. And it doesn't matter how the people's lives themselves end, because the point that their lives intersect with this plot is now done. And so for somebody like Novikov, who has ascended to great heights in the Soviet system, no matter what, he's going to be doing this political jockeying for the rest of his life. Maybe he succeeds, maybe he becomes a member of the Central Committee, who knows? Maybe he gets dragged down through the mud because he happens to be, related to somebody he's related to somebody who is arrested, and, somebody more powerful than him wants to, take him out of politics, basically, right? So there's any number of things that can happen to him, and the best way that this part of the novel ends, I think, is really just very anxious. That's how I feel about Novikov and Victor and a lot of the main characters that we have been reading about. I feel very anxious thinking about them, because you know that it's really just one misstep, one incidental comment, and they're pretty much done. And that's that's tough.
Right. Yeah. And it's a scary place to be for all of them. Like you said, one misstep, even if he does get out of this. And that's true for everyone. Could be true for Getmanov, could be true for Nudobnov. We're in a fundamentally different stage of the war. I think you made a good point earlier that now it could be someone trying to get him out of the way for political reasons. It doesn't matter what the reason is, but the whole, as the narrator is trying to portray to us, the narrator is trying to argue to us that this is the whole spirit of the war is taking on this political element that couldn't be there when it was a fight for pure existential survival. It still is, of course, but in the narrative of the novel, the spirit of the war is changing. Even if they are not fundamentally acting any differently, Novikov's race to Ukraine, it wasn't that he wasn't going to do that, but for the potential for glory. It's just that now there's that little added thing, and that is true for everyone involved in this war.
Yeah, it's the stakes are suddenly different, I think, too.
Yeah.
And one of the people who now has different stakes, I would say, is Victor. Him getting the phone call from Stalin completely changes his outlook from being practically on the brink of death, or the brink of being forced out of society, or potentially imprisoned, or any number of horrible things. Now things are going pretty well, and as he says at one point, it makes perfect sense to him that his research and work should be tied up in the success of the Soviet state. But there's a little part of him that realizes, well, maybe that's not right. Maybe there is something a little more complicated going on. But oh, darling Victor, our dear Victor, this is a good chapter in the sort of carrot side of the Soviet Union, where we so often hear about the stick, but these few chapters we get the carrot.
Absolutely. In the same way that Novikov's chapters address, I think, trying to talk about, keep in mind, people reading this novel don't necessarily know about the Gulag system. That's not widespread knowledge. In fact, that's carefully guarded knowledge. Those involved, those who have relatives who've been arrested, of course, they understand something's going on, but that's a subsection of society who are experiencing that, who that is disproportionately put on. So it is, the narrator is elaborating on the logics and the illogics of that system. Same is true here. I think you put it exactly right.
Yeah, and one of the things that hasn't necessarily been directly addressed, I don't think, which is really well addressed here, is that sort of bureaucracy aspect of the state. We so often hear about the way that it's used to exclude people and to keep people out of certain, knowledge loops, or however you might phrase it. But in this chapter, or in this part, we have the opposite effect, which is that it is speeding up everything for Victor. Anything he could possibly want, he has access to. And as the narrator says, it's as though it's freed from the restraints of gravity. And so, the opposite is true. For every person that is excluded from the system, somebody else is basically able to reap the benefits of that. And in this part, Victor is doing that. And I think that is one of the parts that's not always talked about as much. It's an important aspect of how Soviet bureaucracy worked. Any number of people who lived through it could tell you a story about how I couldn't get XYZ done until I talked with somebody, this family friend that I knew who worked in this department. Okay, all of a sudden everything is perfectly fine, right? And that's on a very small level now. And here for Victor, we're talking about the full support of the state for his research, because clearly it has really important military application. So it's just a different look at it. And Victor, I think he really struggles with that. I think he's having a hard time in his part on how to feel about it, I think, and what to do in that situation.
Yeah, and it's getting at actually a big social issue for the Soviet Union that I'm sure, I wouldn't say that Grossman is particularly incisive. I'm sure anyone living through it was aware of it, but not necessarily on the minds of leadership until later. There's an interview with Gorbachev, I believe. I can't remember the television program. I think it was like Great Heights or something like that. But basically, he's talking to a television crew, and he talks about his time, not as quite as a party secretary yet, but he said it was embarrassing the ways that we couldn't make women's pantyhose because the bureaucracy around creating consumer products was not that. There was no way for them to respond. I mean, the Gosplan had to say, okay, we're going to make these things, and they weren't necessarily going out and asking how much do you want these consumer goods, but. And something you identify here is the military application of products, of some of these things, of products, in this case of research, has always been really clear. And the bureaucracy of the Soviet Union, not so good at making consumer products, when it was applied to war materials, often becomes quite good at running itself, or it suddenly, all the ways it fails in every other respect, suddenly works. Of course, that in other times when the military is not quite as they don't need functional tanks as much. That's when you get into some of the wonky things of the same bureaucracy. But we are seeing the exact same study, Victor's before and after Stalin or someone at some level realizes the application to probably nuclear technology. Before, when there was no particular military application, it was just promising science. It was subject to the strange bureaucracy of where you are made or broken based on how people like you or luck. Once the military capabilities are made clear of his research, then the whole state bends itself towards making it. That is something that was always true of this system, that those clearer goals, and often those were military ones, it worked better in that regard. I think it's not unique to the Soviet Union. Basically, any country on earth, you can look at it and see how it particularly bends itself to working and making the military industry quite profitable or quite successful in ways that others are not. But each of them have their own character as well. And this is the Soviet Union's character of that.
Yeah, I mean, Victor literally couldn't get his own secretary back, right? Or his own, office admin staff back when they were relocating. And, that was 15 chapters ago. And now all of a sudden it's hey, Victor, we'll build you your own city if you want. Now that we know that you're about to make nukes for us, it's all of a sudden, it's much different for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, as you talked about, the way that he's kind of coerced into signing this document that he knows is fake, and he knows that this is a completely fabricated situation, but things are going pretty well. I mean, his research is going well, and he's not going to be arrested, so that's pretty good. His family will be safe. That's also good. And so he's starting to struggle with this question, saying, okay, Victor, buddy, what are you doing? You were ready to die for this cause a week ago, and now all of a sudden the state says, hey, you're doing a great job. And, he's basically signing on to a death warrant for people. And I think that this is another absolutely critical part of the book, which is that Victor is not driven 100% by fear. It's usefulness. He wants to feel as if he's being useful and as if his research is contributing to something good. And it probably isn't, but it feels like it is, and that for him is going to be good enough. And that's another one of those lines that I think is kind of buried in there a little bit, but I think it's a really important one to understand his his character and what is driving him.
Yeah, right. And I think, too, I mean, his character in relation to the state is another thing that is interesting to me about this, because I think Victor's and Kremov's, which we'll talk about in a bit, this is a very specific reflection on the Soviet state, where, of course, throughout this entire book, it's been implicitly drawing these criticisms, or even putting out some explicit criticisms. But this is where you're really getting to some of the theses, where you kind of get to the sort of, I'm almost calling it like this revolution betrayed sort of narrative. And that's more Kremov. But here we find, whereas Victor he's now so close, and now that he is friends with the people running the system, their ways of pressuring him, as you were talking about, is so different and so personal to him, because it's his friends, in kind of quotes there, make him do these things. But he's so close to the Soviet state, but that's not making him a better person, right? The idea at some level, at some point of the Soviet state, was to create a better kind of person, Homo Sovieticus. But as he's so close to the state, this text, the narrator says, his work was important, even to the state, but his private thoughts were mean, petty, and trivial. It was as though they were in inverse proportion. So his closeness to the Soviet project does not make him a better man. In fact, it seems to be making him fuller of anxiety and pettiness, because he's got so much more to lose now. Whereas before he was standing on some sort of principle, now he understands that he is standing in a way that's not true to his principles. He understands and he thinks, I still maintain my criticisms of the Holodomor. I maintain my criticisms of collectivization, all these things. But he knows that doesn't have any substantial meaning. He's no longer acting according to that. If his friends ask him to sign this letter, he's got a lot to lose now. And he can't, if he stands on principle, he understands very well what there is to lose. And so he goes along with it.
Yeah, and there's the sort of Victor-state relationship in the end of his arc, but probably one that's a little even sadder, I would say, is then the Victor-Ludmila arc that's kind of wrapped up, and that's really where his arc here ends, because you see him go through this, and then he's kind of looking around to I don't know, like he's looking around to his support system, and he doesn't really have a ton. And of course, he's been fantasizing about Maria Ivanovna the entire novel, but basically the conclusion that he comes to is that only Ludmila has been of absolutely any comfort to him during all of this. And to me, that's extremely sad, just because of the fact that, like, she also pieces together the fact that Victor is completely checked out of their marriage, and she's not an idiot, right? She's figured this out. She's just so deep in grief that Victor has thought that she hasn't figured it out, right? And there is this line that was just so heartbreaking when Victor realizes that she has put it together, saying that he felt quite shaken by the look on Ludmila's face. It was a look of utter exhaustion, touching helplessness, and shame, both on his behalf and her own. On his way down the stairs, he thought that if he were to break with Ludmila and never see her again, he would remember that look until his dying day. And that, to me, is probably like the most brutal line of, anything from Victor in the last, I don't know, like basically since his mother dies in the book, right? Like this is almost on that level. It is like a haunting image for him to be left with. Sure, we know that he'll have a really tenuous relationship with the state for the remainder of his life, but that relationship with his wife, that is, that's pretty much severed. I'm not sure there's really much coming back from that. So that one, to me, that's probably the saddest ending. Yeah,
it is. It's also interesting because the relationship between Grossman, the narrator, and the women he writes is a very interesting one, in that there are a lot of women, and the relationships to the men in their life is not really engaged with that much, right? There's like it's sort of there, in the same sense that everyone has their family relationships, which Grossman gives to everyone equally, but we don't have often as much insight into how they see them, the men in their lives, beyond like, Yevgenia being like, oh, I don't really understand. Why am I still so attached to Krimov? Still an important theme, but right, so much of this novel is dedicated to Victor and him being like, I hate my wife. No, I rely on my wife. She's there in these moments, right? In the last chapter when he's thinking about the guilt over signing that letter, Ludmilla is one of the few people he kind of mentions talking to him, partially because she's one of the only few around. But that being said, this is like the one moment where the narrator specifically draws attention to the fact that their attitude is actually absent from this narrative. How much does Ludmilla know? How long has she known it? We don't know that. And it's so interesting that there is both, there's like this moment of acknowledgement that is an unknown factor to Victor, and to us, also to us, the reader, because the narrator hasn't given us that perspective. I think that's super interesting that there is this moment, and yet it can't be stopped. That mere knowledge isn't enough. And like you say, that's what makes it, I think, one of the most haunting things of this novel. Where do you go from there? Well, and the real relationship that Grossman very much based this on, Grossman did leave Olga Mikhailovna for the Zabolotskaya, Yelena Zabolotskaya, the rough parallel for Maria Ivanovna in this novel. And it's so, that's one of the things I'm really trying to come to terms with, that how you feel about an author, I don't think necessarily reflects on their work. But with Grossman, you look at his life and it's like such an interesting tale of moments of just such incredible heroism, and also moments of like, oh man, if I knew you, I would not be impressed with you as a person kind of stuff. So that's, I think, what makes this particular moment so hard hitting, and that you can see the life parallels, although as always, the usual reminder that an author's own experiences, we can't say how much that translates into their work. This one, how much it reflects life, is kind of hard not to think about that. But yeah, it's one that's really sticking with me, that reminder, and yet the ways in which pure knowledge is, again, not enough.
That's a really good point when thinking about the relationship between Grossman and life and fate. And it's something that Victor, it's particularly felt with Victor, where he does achieve things that are great and very grandiose in terms of their overall impact on the world and his country and people around him, but at the same time, his personal life's in shambles. I mean, absolutely in shambles. And, it's just, it becomes a question then of what's really important. And I think that it's something that you'd like to think will be something he realizes at some point, but based on how it's gone so far in his life and in the novel, probably not.
Right, yeah. I think it's very interesting that his signing of the letter, the final chapter, is him kind of basically realizing that that this horrible moment doesn't have to define him. He still has the choice to make to be a better person. He also has the choice to be a worse person every single day. And he hopes, he kind of draws on the strength of his mother to hopefully make that right decision every hour, every day, year in, year out. He must struggle to be a man, struggle for his right to be pure and kind. He must do this with humility. And if it came to it, he mustn't be afraid of death. Even then, he must remain a man. And I think that's many ways one of the most important lines of this novel. It's telling us what, we have the option to give up our humanity and embrace the state in times like these, but you also have the option not to do that. And it can be a very difficult option, but often it's one of the most important ones. But that relief is given to his decision to comply with the state, not given to his decision to treat his wife so poorly. That's just left off on the, well, I don't know, we're going to leave with that one kind of attitude. So to your point of the how simultaneously being a great person in one sense does not in any way mean that you are a good person to people in your life, or that you have a well put together or well taken care of set of personal relationships.
And I don't really know exactly how to phrase what I'm about to say, but you can definitely see how a lot of the women in this novel, they sort of lack the interiority that I remember them having in Stalingrad, at least more so. And I don't think that this is a question of, can Grossman adequately write women? I think that he can. I think that it's an artistic choice to sort of not, and to, deny us as the reader insight into what they're thinking, because the characters that he is filtering through are just so absolutely dense. I mean, Victor in particular, when it takes him until the end of the book to realize that his wife has noticed that he's obsessed with basically their only friend. I think that this is kind of a conscious choice on Grossman's behalf. And, I think that's all right. I think that these characters, they wouldn't be interesting if they, had the power of omniscient narratorial introspection. It just wouldn't be the same. And that's sort of the fun of us as the readers, getting to dissect and pick apart each of these characters and to tell them what we think they should be doing differently.
Which is, of course, the most important part.
Yes, of course. But that's kind of where I thought I landed on Victor, even though he just super annoyed me at many points during the novel. That's kind of my ultimate conclusion on the why Victor.
Why Victor? I think that's a great one. And yeah,
why Victor?
Why Victor? The narrator repeatedly reminds you that we are not seeing the actually omniscient view of the novel, as much as it may appear to be as such, right? This is not the first time the fact that he's very clearly intending infidelity has been brought to our attention, or to his own attention, and that's not explored then either. And I think that goes to your point about it being a choice to really functionally remove that perspective up until this moment.
Yeah, and that's where we kind of end up leaving old Victor.
Old Vicky.
Yeah.
Before we move on to Kremov's final 2 chapters, maybe this is a good point for a break.
Yeah, I think so.
This episode is brought to you by you, our listeners. You can support independent podcasting by heading to our website, slaviclitpod.com. You'll get access to the notes we used to make this episode, including links to all secondary sources mentioned.
If you want to support the show, but don't want to spend any of your hard-earned doubloons, you can join our email list for free at slaviclitpod.com. Or you can leave us a nice review wherever you get your podcasts.
Questions, comments, want to appear on our Office Hours podcasts? Drop us a line. You can reach our voicemail at 209-800-3944. Or you can also email us a voice recording or text question at slaviclitpod@gmail.com. We'll bring your question onto the podcast and do our best to address it.
All right, back to catastrophic conclusions.
Catastrophically Kremov.
Yeah, sounds like a Nickelodeon show.
All right, pitch. It's just Kremov in jail with Katzenellenbogen. It's a 2-man comedy show from the Soviet prison system. How does that sound?
It sounds really topical.
Yeah.
I know, people are real, yeah. So Soviet era comedy is really big right now.
That's true. Well, it's always really big in our households, but...
Well, a viewership of 2.
Single-handedly keeping all the reposts of Operation Ui afloat.
Pretty much. But yeah, the Kremov conclusion is not particularly funny.
No. It's a little funny. Katzenellenbogen's still there with his usual zingers.
Yeah. He's pretty funny. I mean, he's always funny. He's inadvertent comic relief, I think, throughout that part of the novel. But to me, the Kremov conclusion is that it doesn't actually matter whether he ends up alive or dead, because he is, as he describes, part of the hide that was being flayed off the still living body of the revolution. And he's part of the scraps. He's on the scrap heap. There's basically no use for him, no reason to keep him around. There's just he serves no purpose to this new state. And so there is that aspect, I think, that, like when we leave him, he's kind of life and death and in interrogation, and he's still alive, and he gets the package from Zhenya, and that's a nice conclusion on that part. But I think where Grossman then will insert himself a little bit is this broader conversation on penal servitude and the sort of, I don't know, like prison state, basically, is what he's foreseeing, which, if only he knew. And he starts to talk about how the 20th century, he says it intruded upon the sacred simplicity of penal servitude, the simplicity of spade, pick, axe, saw, and gangs of convicts. The world of camps was now able to absorb progress. And he places himself in almost a comical position, right? Like he's wishing for the days gone of, oh, remember when penal servitude used to be like this? But I think what he's getting to is that there is an additional level of horror that comes along with imprisonment when it's not where the state's not really pretending that this is because you did something bad. It's just because, hey, it's free labor, and now you can be useful this way, as basically a slave laborer. And there is a part in one of the previous chapters about a large hydroelectric dam being built with prison labor, and it's something that is really a hallmark of the Soviet system. I mean, the amount of large public infrastructure projects that were built with, like gulag labor, it's pretty significant. And so I think that that Grossman, again, this is one of those where you're like, hey, you really thought you were going to get this book published? That's amazing.
Right.
Yeah, there's parts of the criticism that you might be able to ascribe to a time that's no longer relevant, or, okay, this was happening in the past, but no, this is very much happening when he was writing.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. And I think that's what makes... This is something that, over the course of Grossman's life, he will have a changing attitude towards the Soviet Union scene in the his books expressed in different ways. I think... Throughout the main line of this part of Life and Fate is kind of like, I kind of called it earlier the revolution betrayed, right? That's when Krymov is talking about the hide being flayed off the revolution, being flayed off the still living members of the revolution. It doesn't matter what's inside, it only matters that they still have the form of it. That's sort of a criticism laid at the feet of Stalin, as if, okay, we had the right idea with the Bolshevik Revolution, and then Stalin took it in this bloody direction where the actual meat of what people wanted is gone, and yet it only lives on in its hide. By the time you get to like everything flows at the end of his life, that's when he lays down. And that, by the way, that's a pretty common, I think, viewpoint of the Soviet Union. That's something that if you talk to people today, people who lived were born in the Soviet Union, that was an attitude I've heard expressed when we were living in Russia. There's also, Grossman will go on to say, no, it wasn't just Stalin taking it in the wrong direction. Later on, by Everything Flows, he will lay the fault with Lenin himself, that the very foundations that were laid down in the Bolshevik Revolution were themselves flawed. This is sort of this building criticism we see here, but I think this one very much lies in the Stalin took it in the wrong direction, where we've got these two different views, where Krymov is pretty self-apparent where he stands on it at this point, right? The metaphor, gross as it is, pretty straightforward. Katzenelnbogen's, I think, is really interesting because he's always a funny character, but I guess when we say it's funny, it also he's kind of horrifying in another way, because everything he expresses is kind of horrible, but it's so horrible that it becomes funny. And when Katzenelnbogen is expressing this view where the camp becomes so complete that it it doesn't matter whether you're inside the camp or outside the camp, right? This kind of perfect system where everyone, and he says, yes, of course, the campuses right now are bad. The way that we have prisoners running things, or violent prisoners running the gulag, that's bad. But the nice thing about this is that we can remove the human element. We can remove the ability for people to make inefficient choices. There will be specialized labor, and now that specialized labor is being wasted, but in a better time, a better place, specialized labor in the camp will be put to its exact right end. And that solves the problem of inefficiency in our own society. That solves the problem of inefficiency in capitalist societies. This is something that exists in both ends. There we go, the perfect end. And that kind of logic continues until it doesn't matter whether you're in the camp or out of the camp, you're put to your right end. And the principle of freedom is subordinated clearly and absolutely to the higher principle of reason. And it doesn't matter whether you're in the camp or out, it's exactly the same. And that's when you can do away with the camp. And when he says the triumph of humanitarianism will finally come about. And it will not mean the end of the camp, will not mean a resurgence of chaos and primeval principles of personal freedom. That will all be done away with. And it's like a mocking version of some principles of the original Bolshevik party, where there is this desire to remove human inefficiency and really make it machine efficient. But it also, it calls to mind many people. This sounds very similar to me to Pyotr Kropotkin expresses in The Conquest of Bread, the perfect Soviet state, the perfect socialist state. He kind of argues can exist in a capitalist world, because how will the capitalists possibly subvert our system? If you come into our system and try to pay someone to subvert the system, they'll say, why would I do that? I don't need money because I already have everything I need. It's sort of under that sort of anarchist principle, this perfectly organized system. And Katzenelnbogen expresses this system, which seems ridiculous, but is also potentially a natural endpoint of some of these philosophies, which in the same way that even though it doesn't possess the horrible fascist character of this age, in its own way possesses the same, one of the main principles is the negation of human freedom. So even Grossman here is expressing this sort of farcical system, which has the same end as fascism. Even without the hallmarks, even without these other beliefs of fascism, it can still have the same end of negating human freedom. So it's not just a problem of fascism specifically. It's not just a problem of this Soviet system specifically. It's a problem of this logic, which exists forever and onward. And this right here, well, it's sort of farcical, I think later on, sort of you can take it more seriously, as I think Grossman in later writing does take that idea more seriously and say, no, this is the overall problem. This essential problem where everyone's trying to negate human freedom. And so I think that's why it's really important that essentially Krymov's part ends on this tale, because it's a very wide-ranging, it has lots of implications for beyond this era. The Wolfhound era is sort of coming to an end, at least this particular Wolfhound era, and yet its problems can maintain without any of its features in another way.
I know that we've talked about this probably a million times in our dailies and in our previous episodes, but that sort of denial of human freedom by an impulse towards efficiency is something that we still have. And it's not always as drastic as like throwing people in camps, but that sentiment still does exist. Like that has not gone away by any means. And it's that same, like that's how you get the same sort of dumb comments like, oh, well, we don't need art, just go to business school. It's a more efficient route to making money, or, like something like that, right? Obviously, I'm a bit of hyperbole. Maybe you have family members that talk like that. I do. For sure. And it's kind of like, okay, well, that's something. But that still exists. Like that's still there. And if you think that's interesting, you should go listen to our episode that we did with Maya Vinokour, because that was one of my favorites that we did this year, probably.
Yeah, right.
Same kind of topic that we talk about there.
Yeah, and I think that same tendency expressed itself in sort of like very seemingly innocent ways. I think one that I've never had anyone in my life say that you shouldn't engage with art, but the attitude I've often encountered is, hey, if you love something, why don't you make a buck off it? And yeah, that's, I think, in a capitalist system, when you need to make money and get by, absolutely a valid way to do it. If you are able to somehow get a better value for your labor and you enjoy doing it, yeah, go for it. But it also, at the same time, speaks to this desire and this need and the forces that put upon us to make everything we do mean something. It's skill building. It's always moving forward in your career, always something that helps you be a better worker. It can't just exist for fun or because it makes you a better person or because it makes you a better, something or other. It's always got to be towards bettering yourself. So in some way...
It can't just exist to exist.
Yeah, exactly. So I think even without necessarily having that negative element, it speaks to the pressures that we are put under in our society.
Yeah, and so that to me is a pretty major point of the Krymov arc and everything that we've talked about up until now. But if you want to move on to the last kind of arc, I think we can wrap this all up together.
Yeah, and I think the last arc will also get to the audience question too. So we'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah, so we have Spiridonov, who we find out, like you said, he's been basically demoted. And he thinks, well, yeah, I could have been sent to a camp for doing what I did, but I'm just being sent to the Urals, so really, all things considered, that's, not the worst. And it's still a sad moment for his family and friends, and it's just a very weird sort of parting scene that we're left with between everybody, just because of the fact that this is kind of like the remaining core of this family that we had spent so much time with in Stalingrad, and so many of them have been killed or have been imprisoned or, have sort of faded out of the family life for whatever reason. And you're just left with this very strange impression of, a family that just doesn't have much left. And of course, they don't have much physically left because nobody does, because it's the immediate post-war. But the worst thing is that those familial bonds are not really there in the same way that they were. And it does kind of echo a little bit of the Victor Ludmila storyline that we had just talked about. But it's kind of, there's a similar thing going on. The additional layer, I think, is Alexandra Vladimirovna. She has this great summation of the book, and I think Grossman gives her a wonderful, wonderful ending to her plot and the plot of the novel. I do think it's wrapped up absolutely wonderfully. And as she is going through and kind of just she's just sitting there in the war-ravaged city, just thinking, and it's just kind of like that. She's older, she's very wise, she has seen a lot, and so she has seen multiple generations come and go. She's seen multiple wars, revolutions. Like, she's seen it all. And her conclusion is that, and I'll quote here, "Whatever life holds in store, hard-won glory, poverty and despair, or death in a labor camp, they will live as human beings and die as human beings. The same as those who have already perished, and in this alone lies man's eternal and bitter victory over all the grandiose and inhuman forces that ever have been or will be." And I think, unfortunately for us, this is kind of the most optimistic ending that we're going to be getting. Just that we all within ourselves have this inextricable force of humanity that cannot be stripped from us or taken from us or coerced from us. No matter what, it's always there, and it will always continue to be there. Even if you go to your death, in a tragic or horrible or awful way, that is still there. And in a lot of the really terrible deaths, I think Grossman does kind of ascribe like some of the most elevated images of humanity. If you think back to Sophia Leventon and David, sort of visually mimicking or visually positioned as this Madonna and Babe figure, I think that's just a great example of what he's talking about here. Now, again, when we say this is an optimistic sort of sentiment, it doesn't negate the fact that there are still really, really horrible things that he's writing about and will continue to happen probably forever. Grossman can't fix that, unfortunately, but this is kind of, I think, that conclusion that he draws from that.
Yeah, it's the optimism of cornered prey.
A bit, yeah.
But like you say, this is such a tough moment, but it's also such a beautiful moment too. I think, in my mind, this chapter is also inextricable thematically, or maybe aesthetically, from both the introduction and the ending of Stalingrad itself. As we talked about, Stalingrad, the novel, as we talked about in the daily, this chapter, all of them waiting and having a little dinner with the little food they can scrounge up, mirrors the opening of Stalingrad, where the family, Alexandra Vladimirovna, her daughters, all of their relatives and friends are at a table, and they find what little food they have, and they make a pie with little sugar they have left, and they bring out that vodka that they have so little left at this point, and they celebrate their family. And then Stalingrad, of course, ends on sort of this optimistic note, at least with the Spiridonovs, with Vera, choosing to keep that baby and say that sort of this optimistic, like, oh, there's hope for the future. If I had no hope for the future, I would have aborted this child. Pretty, a very fair decision, in any circumstance, but especially in that circumstance. Here we have thematically sort of the same thing. We've got all of them sitting down, surviving family at this point, turning to the last of their food, a little bit of vodka, one last pie, and it delivers a similar message towards the end of Stalingrad, that life is worth living, still going on, but it's much more nuanced. It's not just like it's worth bring a child into this future, but it's worth it for all of them to keep living to this future. Not only is Mitya, Vera's daughter, going to be there, you can also bring in this sort of gathered family. Maybe Pavel will come with them. Maybe Natalia will come with them. Alexandra, at 70 years old, she thinks it's kind of funny. Spiridonov says, "Look and start a new life," and she kind of laughs at it, but and it's not. She's still alive. Of course, she can still make that life. It's not just a hope for the future. It's a hope for those who are left. And it takes the same idea expressed in Stalingrad and makes it so much more, I don't know, nuanced. It's definitely a more mature point.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where the ending itself, the last final chapter, comes from. That sort of question that lingers as to why end it like this? Why not end it on this sort of optimistic summation that we have in chapter 60? Why include chapter 61? And I made this point on the daily, but I'll just briefly repeat it here, that I think that the point is to take it to the broadest possible sense. I think that going to these two nameless characters who maybe it's hinted at who they are, maybe we don't know, it doesn't necessarily matter, I don't think, if you can deduce who they are or not. I think the point is that as these two characters are walking in the silence, they have access to something around them that is beautiful. They have this burgeoning spring in the middle of the forest where, as it says, it was the past that slept under the snow beneath this cool half-light. The joy of lovers' meetings, the hesitant chatter of April birds, people's first meetings with neighbors who had seemed strange at first and then become a part of their lives. And so it was just, first of all, an exceptionally beautiful way to end. And I do think that that's important, to have that reaffirmation that there is, again, something beautiful that continues to exist as a result of us in some ways, and also independently of us, just this nature that sort of reclaims that space and continues to go on living. And I just think it's a beautiful way to conceptualize the past, right? It's not just this stagnant, dead past, but it's all of these really active, dynamic forces that are beneath that snow. And there's no escaping what's beneath the snow because it's always there beneath the snow. But we can continue to walk on into the spring and, hope for a better next season. It probably won't be, but we can hope for it.
Right.
It probably can't be worse than what's depicted in the book. It can be equally as bad, but who knows? Maybe it's better. And that thought, I think, should give us a little bit of solace, right? That we all have the opportunity to help contribute to that. And I don't know, it's not, it might not be the most satisfying ending for some, but personally, I really loved it.
I don't think it could have been ended any other way with this. It would have seemed almost a robbery to me to even give closure, right? I think closure implies an end to something.
You want one more checklist burn. Yes,
well, okay. I would take that. That's true. But on the whole, closure to a narrative arc generally implies the end of the story, and it's not their end yet. It's still ongoing. They have another spring left in them.
Yeah, it's the end of the action that Grossman has chosen to depict. It's the end of that set time period. But again, right, these are all amalgamations of, many different people, many different types of people. And so, it's not this just pure historical look at something. It is sort of like dynamically trying to understand what it is. And I think that this novel in particular gives us a lot better insight into, if people, whoever listening, struggles to really understand what is the value of literature, why read a book when I can just read a history book, for instance, right? It gives us something different. It gives us something completely different. And this is a great chapter to sort of illustrate that point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that's a good lead into an audience question, which was sent in to us by email, if I have this correct.
Yeah, we got it by email. I'll just sort of paraphrase the question, which is asking about the title, Life and Fate. And the question asker says that they understand that this is an homage to War and Peace, or could be an homage, but they wanted to know why Life and Fate, because War and Peace is an antonym, and is life an antonym to fate? How does it form that? Does it form that? And they say, I suppose in some ways it is, since Grossman thinks of freedom as the essence of life, and freedom seems to be sort of this antonym to fate. And Grossman seems to describe the state as the fate for individuals in it, and they have the freedom to submit or not submit to it, yet the book is not called Freedom and Fate, but Life and Fate. Is it because freedom and fate might be too in the face? I was also reading Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, and there's a line in chapter 2 where the narrator talks about the conversation topics between Onegin and Lenski, ranging from good and evil, life and fate. I wonder if this phrase in Pushkin is the same as Grossman's title. Sorry, I know I said I was going to paraphrase, but I think I made it longer. And then I realized there were actually a lot of specifics in there, so I probably should start reading it. And here we are. On the Pushkin thing, I don't know. I don't think it's lifted directly from that. I can't say 100%. Obviously, Grossman would have read Pushkin, and he definitely would. Everybody's read Eugene Onegin, so it's certainly possible it could have been an influence, but I don't know that it was necessarily that.
We don't have documentary evidence to directly tie a connection, as far as I can see from what has been written. This is the brief answer to your question. But on a narrative level,
just the more interesting question is not one that arises from a historical biographic approach, I don't think. I think that even within the question that was asked, you can see the more interesting discussion emerges on the topic of what does Grossman see as the essence of life and fate. And that's not one that I think I can answer, because I think that's it's very, very vague. There are only a few points where he really addresses that specifically. And again, I'm not sure. I don't know. Personally, I don't know if I really see a lot of evidence of Grossman agreeing with the idea that there is such a thing as fate per se. At least not in the way that we traditionally conceive of it. So does that make it better or more confusing?
I think a little of both, little column A, little column B.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we understand, as the listener says, that life, the essence of life, is the sort of freedom, and so yeah, I could see how this could be an antonym where fate in some way is a denial of that freedom, but maybe
well, I
not.
think one of the things about War and Peace is that it's not just that they're antonyms. The novel, in many ways, by posing the two of those two things together, enlighten you, the reader, about a lot of the connections, a lot of the similarities and parallels between the two, and that they're not as actually opposite as they may immediately appear. And I think the same is true of Life and Fate, that you may in some way think of life as this linear arc which leads you into your fate. But I think this novel also shows that that's not nearly as straightforward a connection as you might immediately assume, in the sense that every character has a fate that they're subjected to by the state, and yet at the same time that doesn't actually negate the fact that they are still living it. Victor is subjected to the fate that the state elevates him, but also is going to be demanding things that are going to be probably negating his humanity in some ways, and yet he's still living through it. So my opinion on it is that it functions in a very similar way as War and Peace, that those two things are not actually antonyms, and the same is true of Life and Fate, both of which are, I think, controversial opinions if you were to say them without any context, but I think that in many ways these novels explore how those two things are not as immediately clear as it may seem.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and control F the book as well for mentions of fate, just to look a little more closely at it. But yeah, no, I'm kind of inclined to agree with you. I'd be curious, anyone else who's been reading along with us, how they feel on this question of life and fate. Are they complementary? Are they opposites? What are they? Yeah. It's a great question.
I think it's a great question just because it's one of the ones where it doesn't matter what end you lead to. It really forces you to think about, to really have an opinion on it towards the end. I think that's great in of itself. It's a fantastic discussion question. And it'll tell you a lot about what your takeaways from the book are. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope that you have many takeaways from this book.
We can only hope.
And I am eternally grateful for everybody that read along with us.
First of all, we wanted to thank everyone who contributed thoughts to us, mostly on Discord. If you've been listening to the dailies, you've heard many of their comments throughout this podcast. And we just wanted to extend another thank you to everyone for reading, undertaking this completely unhinged task with us, and also really contributing to it. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Yeah, I don't think I would have made it through if I didn't have people talking to me through it. Quite frankly, it was really helpful.
Yeah, all of you made a great difference. Oh, before we go on, I also want to mention that I'm going to be crediting everyone as they asked to be credited when we asked them for permission during the daily episodes. If you hear your name in here and you want your actual name swapped out with your Discord name, or your Discord name swapped out with your actual name, let me know. Happy to change out the audio. But in no particular order, wanted to extend a thank you to NattyBoy24, Sally, Mike Shaw, who also is in the Instagram Bookstapug, I like that, Leia, Emma, Tom Bombadillo, Disco Barbello, The Bookworm Stories, Emmanuel Mimo, or Reagan, Mary, also goes by The Honey Reads, Peter, Penelope, Dominique, United Nihilists, and Daniel.
And to everybody who has been financially supporting us throughout this series, whether you listen to the series or whether you're just saying, oh my gosh, Matt and Cameron, can you get back to something that's not 900 pages? We still thank you. It is only with your help that we are able to undertake these crazy ideas and to continue making what we want to make. So we want to extend a sincere thank you again to everybody that is currently supporting us.
Yes, and that's Cynthia, Seamus, Camille, Emma, Lauren, Erica, Michelle, Juliana, Diane, Oleg, John, Timex, Melissa, Baron, Aldo, Ben, Gabe, George, Claire, Amy, Allie, Soraya, Jackson, Molly, Emma, Mike, Marianne, Mickey, Eric, Reagan, Mike, Peter, Eric, Ben, Claire, Jeff, Inez, Mai, Robert, Joseph, Daniel, Lou, Nina, Gary, Janice, Mary, Anne, Isaac, Emily, Amanda, Caitlin, Yitza, Arini, and Packrob. Oh, I got it in one breath. There we go. Oh, okay, Matt, that's a lot. Probably at this point, a lot of people stopped listening at the names, but we wanted to put them ahead of the ending of this episode because it was all of you. Thanks to all of you that made this possible. What's next? A break for us. We're going to take a little time off.
Yes.
We're going to be back at the beginning of September. Until then, you can still expect episodes. They're going to be reruns, just like our last break, which was June and last year. They're going to be mostly reruns from some of the interviews we did this year, which we think didn't quite get the attention they deserved because everyone who we did them with were fantastic. They were amazing interviews, had such a good time, and wanted to re-up them now that we were no longer flooding your feed with this absurd project.
Yes, so if you were tuning out during the time that we were doing Life and Fate, it just wasn't for you. Totally understand. But if you didn't even know that we were doing normal episodes during this time, whoops. Lucky for you, surprise, we have a bunch for you to listen to. And the reruns are exceptional examples of those.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how to end it after 7 months of work. I don't even know what to say at this point other than, again, thank you.
What music do we use?
The music used over the last 7 months was Staroye Kino by Peremotka. You can find more of their stuff on Bandcamp and Spotify. The links and spelling are in the show notes.
You'll hear from us again soon.